My wife and her lover tried to abduct our child from the playground. Public humiliation ruined their lives. I'm 28, and I recently found out that my wife, also 28, had an affair with her former supervisor. He's 35, married with kids, and it hit me like a freight train. My wife and I have been married for 5 years, but we've been together much longer. Since high school. We were each other's first for everything. We even grew up as neighbors when we were kids. She's always been there, through everything. We both come from pretty rough backgrounds, broken homes and all, but we had each other. We always told ourselves that we were building something different from what we grew up around. Or at least that's what I thought. Now, I'm starting to wonder if I've been a complete fool this whole time. I still work remotely, while she's been going into the office. There aren't many women in her field, and she used to vent to me a lot about how her workplace was kind of a boys' club. Her affair partner, who was her supervisor back then, was supposedly one of the good guys who had her back at work. Recently, she got promoted and became a supervisor herself, which I was really happy about. It came with new responsibilities like going on a few business trips throughout the year. Her first one was last week, from Wednesday to Friday. Before she left, I told her I'd be cheering her on from home. She looked at me with a smile and said the same thing she always does when we're apart. I'm leaving my heart with you. Take care of it. On Monday, she came home early from work, and I could instantly tell something was off. She seemed overwhelmed, and there was a red mark on her cheek. My wife is pretty pale and bruises easily, so I asked her what had happened, but she just asked me for a hug. She said she just needed to feel my arms around her. I hugged her, and after a few minutes, she sat me down on the couch. That's when she dropped the bomb that blew my entire life apart. She told me she had slept with her former supervisor during that work trip. At first, I couldn't even process it. It was like I was watching someone else's life unfold, or like she was going to tell me it was all some sick, twisted joke. Honestly, I would have preferred that. I didn't say a word while she confessed. I just sat there, completely numb. Cheating is a huge trigger for me because I've lived through it before. My own family was shattered by an affair. My dad's affair, to be exact. I'm the one who caught him and told my mom. Since then, my dad and I have barely spoken. He still blames me for ruining the family and has never forgiven me for it. My wife knew all of this. She's seen firsthand what cheating did to me and my family. She's literally watched me cry over it when we were teenagers and was there to comfort me. And now she's done the exact same thing. And now she's done this to me. To us. Apparently, the guy's wife found out and confronted them both at work. It turned into a massive scene, right in front of all the employees and even some customers. His wife called mine white trash and slapped her in front of everyone. After that, things got out of control and the other employees had to step in. Security eventually escorted the woman out of the building. After the slap, my wife called her older sister, who's 30. According to my wife, her sister chewed her out and told her she had no choice but to come clean to me. She said I deserved to hear it from her. My wife kept looking at me, waiting for me to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I just sat there, numb. When she begged me to speak, the only thing I could manage to ask was, what exactly happened on the trip? She took a deep breath and told me that on the second day of the trip, she and the other team leads went out for drinks. Apparently, it was supposed to be a team bonding thing. One by one, people started heading out until it was just her and her former supervisor. They ended up back in his room, listening to music. She said he kept complimenting her, telling her how sexy she looked, and even saying that if he were me, he wouldn't be able to keep his hands off her. Eventually, he kissed her. She told me she didn't know what she was thinking or why she let it happen, but she didn't stop him. One thing led to another, and before she knew it, they were having sex. At that point, I couldn't handle hearing anymore. I got up off the couch and told her to stop. She reached out to take my hand, but I pulled away and told her not to touch me. That's when she completely broke down. She started sobbing and apologizing, saying it was the biggest mistake of her life. She kept telling me how much she hated herself and that she wished more than anything she could take it back. She swore she loved only me and that the alcohol had messed with her judgment. I told her she needed to leave. I told her to call her sister and have her come pick her up. My wife stood up, still crying, and tried to hug me, but I moved away again. She begged me not to throw everything away. She said she'd quit her job, give me full access to her phone, go to counseling, whatever it took. But I couldn't stay there any longer. I told her if she wasn't going to leave, then I would. I didn't even bother packing a bag. I just grabbed my keys and headed for the door. She grabbed my arm, trying to stop me, pleading with me not to do this. She kept saying, after everything we've been through, this can't be the end of us. As much as I was hurt and betrayed, leaving her like that, crying and desperate, still tore me apart. I love her more than I ever thought I could love another person. But she broke me. She threw everything we had away. She threw our entire life and future away. After I left, I ended up driving to my mom's house, which is where I've been staying ever since. I honestly don't know how I held it together during that drive. But the moment I got there, I just broke down. I don't think my mom has ever seen me cry before. Not as a teenager and definitely not as an adult. The only person who's ever seen me cry is my wife. I ended up telling my mom what happened because I couldn't keep it from her, not after showing up in that kind of state. She was heartbroken. My mom has always gotten along really well with my wife. She treated her like a daughter. They were close. Despite everything, she didn't judge my wife. She just told me I could stay as long as I needed and tried to comfort me the best she could. Since I left, my wife has been blowing up my phone with calls and texts. I haven't responded to any of them. Her messages are mostly her begging me to come home, to talk things through, asking me where I am, and pleading with me not to give up on us. I feel completely shattered. I thought I understood this kind of pain, but it's a whole different level when you're the one living it. I never in a million years thought she would do something like this. For the longest time, I believed that there was no coming back from cheating, that if it ever happened, the relationship would be over. But now, I'm not so sure. I keep thinking about whether I should give us another shot. Maybe we could go to counseling, try to work things out and salvage what we had. I keep thinking about all the memories, all the history we share, and how much I still love her. We always felt like we fit together perfectly, like two puzzle pieces. Whenever I felt like I had no one, she was always there. But now I'm completely lost. I don't know what the right move is. I don't know how to move forward. I just feel stuck, torn between what I believed before and what I'm feeling now. I also keep wondering how his wife found out. Was there more to the story than I've been told? Was this going on for longer than I know? The timing of the affair and her promotion just feels too convenient. I can't shake the feeling that maybe that promotion was a reward for their fling. The whole thing is messing with my head, and it's not exactly the kind of image I want in my brain. It's heartbreaking, knowing all the history we have together, and she threw it all away for this. As much as it sucks, I know I did the right thing by leaving. She wasn't going anywhere, so I had to be the one to make the move, even though it feels like it should have been the other way around. First off, I want to thank everyone for the advice, concern, and resources. I haven't been able to respond to every comment or message, but I've read them all, and they mean a lot. This past week has been pure hell. I feel like a helpless kid again, watching my whole world fall apart, and the worst part is, I'm going through it without my wife, who's always been my best friend and biggest support. I was sure I didn't have the full story, so yesterday, I decided to reach out to the other betrayed spouse. I knew I needed to hear her side of things to piece together the full picture. I needed clarity, and I knew she wouldn't have any reason to lie or hold back. So, I found her Facebook account and sent her a message. To my surprise, she responded within 10 minutes and even offered to jump on a video call right then. I didn't hesitate. I told her I was available. The moment I saw her face, I knew she was going through the same kind of hell I was. She didn't have to say a word. She told me that after she was escorted out of the office last Monday, she actually tried to get in touch with me but couldn't find any of my contact info. In fact, one of the last things she said to my wife during that confrontation was that she was going to tell me everything. As she explained this, all I could think about was how my wife rushed home that day, how her sister insisted that I needed to hear about the affair from her. I asked if she knew more about what had gone down on that business trip, or if this really was just a one-night stand like my wife had said. What she told me confirmed my worst fears. The affair started long before the trip. She had proof, texts that showed it was much more than a single night of poor judgment. It was an intense emotional affair. She shared everything with me over screen share, and honestly, I could barely keep it together. She explained that she first noticed something was off back in January. Her husband became distant and uninterested in her, and she started seeing him texting my wife more often. Whenever she asked, he brushed it off as just work talk. The day before the trip, she went to drop something off at his office that he had forgotten, and that's when she saw them together. My wife and her husband were standing close, laughing and joking around. She said the whole vibe between them felt flirty. When they noticed her, they stepped apart, but my wife's face looked panicked, while her husband played it off. That's when she became certain something was going on, but she didn't confront him right away. She wanted undeniable proof, something he couldn't talk his way out of. After the trip, her husband was even more distant and dismissive than before. That night, after he fell asleep, she checked his phone and went through the texts with my wife. Everything was laid out right there. Intimate messages back and forth that started long before the trip. It was clear that the emotional affair had been going on for a while. In the texts, it was obvious that her husband had been the one pursuing my wife, constantly flirting with her and saying things like how he couldn't focus at work whenever she was around. But honestly, that didn't make much of a difference to me. My wife didn't shut him down. She let it happen. Some of the earlier texts were even worse. He was bashing his own wife, saying terrible things about her, including how she had suffered repeated miscarriages. It was disgusting. The way he talked about her, especially after everything they'd been through, made me sick to my stomach. And the fact that my wife had been a part of this, letting it continue, just shattered me even more. In the texts, he kept hinting that maybe he needed a woman like my wife in his life. There were messages from Thursday night, with him inviting her to join the team for drinks, and then more from the next morning that made it painfully clear they had slept together. My wife didn't respond to any of his texts after Thursday night, but by that point it didn't matter. I didn't think I could hurt any worse, but somehow I do. The other betrayed spouse told me it took everything in her not to lose it when she read those texts. Her twins were asleep in the other room, and she didn't want to wake them, so she didn't confront her husband right away. She said that in her heart, she was already done with him. He had crossed a line there was no coming back from. She told me she had never been angrier in her life and that through her rage, she was determined to humiliate him the same way he had humiliated her. So, she faked smiles, acted like everything was fine, and waited until Monday, when she planned to expose him in front of his colleagues, employees, and customers at work. This confrontation had been brewing for a while, and it was apparently a coincidence that my wife happened to be at the office that day as well. When the other betrayed spouse saw my wife standing with her husband and another coworker, she decided to target her too. My wife tried to get her to calm down, but it didn't work. The other betrayed spouse went on to tell me that her husband showed no remorse during the confrontation, just anger at her for causing a scene. She also let me know that he was fired the very next day after the blow-up at work. She kicked him out of the house as well. One of the hardest things she had to do was explain all of this to her twins. I knew exactly what she meant, having watched my own mom go through something similar when my dad cheated. She said that this entire ordeal opened her eyes to who her husband really was. And even though he had pursued my wife, she made it clear that my wife was still responsible for her part in the affair. As a woman, she said she had no sympathy or respect for her. I told her I couldn't blame her for feeling that way, and that she had every right to be angry. Then, to my surprise, she actually apologized to me for her husband's role in the whole mess. For a moment, I didn't even know how to respond. Eventually, I found myself apologizing for what my wife had done, too. She said that the two of us were now members of a club we never asked to join, a club that our spouses forced us into. She asked what I planned to do about my wife, and I told her, honestly, I didn't know yet. I mentioned I wasn't staying with her right now. She wished me all the best, and I wished her the same before we ended the call. We exchanged numbers in case either of us ever needed to talk again. After the call, every raw emotion I was feeling just intensified. I confided in my mom about everything I had learned. She still didn't say anything negative about my wife, but I could see in her face that she was upset. A part of me feels a twisted sense of satisfaction knowing the affair partner is losing everything. His job, his family, and that he's likely suffering. But I'm not proud of that feeling. At the same time, I feel guilty because, while he's facing the consequences, a wife is losing her husband and those kids are losing the family they knew. They're in for a world of pain, and I hate that. I'm also angry with my wife. She's the one who did this to us. She broke our vows and put my health at risk. We had sex after she came back from that trip, and based on the messages, it seems like no protection was used during her affair. I know I should reach out to her and talk about the information I've learned from the other betrayed spouse. I need a full timeline of events. But at the same time, I feel even more lost than I did when I first found out. It's like I'm drowning here. Some part of me suspected this all along. In a moment where she could have come clean and been honest, she still chose to lie. It's heartbreaking. Update. I finally broke no contact with my wife, the one who had an affair with her coworker. First, I just want to thank everyone for all the support, advice, and kind words. This meant a lot to me. Honestly, some of the comments and messages were hard to read, but I know they came from a good place and I needed to hear them. It's been 1 week since D-Day. After talking to the other betrayed spouse and trying to process everything, I haven't been sleeping well. The hardest part is knowing that my wife, the person I've known since we were 5 years old, who's been my best friend since I was 13, had an affair. It's like I'm an empty shell. Every time I step outside, I feel like people know what happened and are secretly laughing at me. Has anyone else ever felt this way? I decided to break no contact and ask her for a detailed timeline. I wasn't planning to give her any warning. I just wanted to show up on Sunday and, if I'm being honest, I wanted to see how she was living. A part of me was even scared that her affair partner might be at the house. The thought that she could be defiling the home we've shared for most of our adult lives was too painful to consider. But after everything, it wasn't far-fetched. I texted the other betrayed spouse and asked for a description of her husband's car, explaining why I needed it. She sent it over and I made the drive back to the house. I kept an eye out for the affair partner's car, but thankfully, it wasn't there. When I walked into the house, I found my wife sitting on the couch, all alone. When I walked in, my wife was stunned to see me. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying. As much as I hated seeing her like that, I had this overwhelming urge to comfort her. But then I remembered why we were in this mess to begin with. It was confusing, almost instinctive to want to help her, but I fought it back. She called my name with a sense of relief, quickly getting up and moving toward me. I stopped her before she got too close and told her to stay where she was. She froze, and then said she'd been so worried about me, thanking me for coming home. I didn't respond. Instead, I asked if the affair partner had been in the house. She quickly said no, but I wasn't taking her word for it. I searched the entire house, and she followed me around, repeating that he had never been here. I didn't find anything suspicious, no signs he had been in the house. I asked if she had been in contact with him, and she admitted he left her a voicemail, but swore she hadn't called him back. She even showed me proof that she had blocked his number. After that, we sat down at the dining room table to talk. I did my best to keep my emotions in check, even though it wasn't easy. I told her I had some questions, and she agreed to answer them, saying she was just glad we were talking again. The first thing I asked was if she had quit her job. She said no, not yet, but she had been suspended for a week, pending an investigation. On the same day, the affair partner was fired. Tomorrow, she'd learn the outcome. She explained that the only reason she hadn't quit yet was because of the investigation. Then, I asked her to tell me the full story of the affair. She looked at me and said she already had, but I told her we both knew there was more to it. I gave her another chance to be completely honest with me and warned her that if I found out she was still hiding something, there would be no going back. She went quiet for a few moments before finally nodding. She opened up about the affair, and what she told me lined up with everything the other betrayed spouse had shown me. She admitted that there had been flirting at work for a while, but she insisted they only had sex once. She didn't go into every detail the other betrayed spouse had shared, but she confirmed the emotional affair had been going on for a while. Even though it was nothing new, Hearing it directly from her made the wound feel fresh again. It hurt just as badly as it did on D-Day. Once again, I found myself sitting in silence. She begged me to tell her what I was thinking. So, I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why? Why would she do this when she knew firsthand what cheating had done to my family? She had seen it all, and yet, she still did this to us. Was she unhappy? At that, she completely broke down, sobbing as she told me she had never been unhappy with me or our marriage. She swore up and down that she loved me and that our relationship was the most important thing in her life. I reminded her that actions speak louder than words. She said she didn't know why she got involved in the affair, but that she never wanted to hurt me. By the time they had slept together, she felt like she had made so many mistakes that she was too far in, and she didn't know how to pull herself out. She said it killed her to realize how deep she was in, but by then, she felt trapped. She went on to tell me that her affair had nothing to do with any failure on my part. It was all her. I asked if she ever felt pressured by the affair partner, and she said no. She explained that everyone loved him at work, and, as I already knew, there was a strong boys' club mentality. During sex, she said she froze up, kept apologizing, and just wanted it to end. If she could take it all back, she would. My emotions were slipping, and I just wanted to get through it. I asked why she had sex with me afterward, especially since she had initiated it. Her only explanation was that she felt so disgusted and guilty that she wanted to wash it away by being with me. I told her she didn't wash anything away. All she did was endanger me to make herself feel better. She had no response to that, just kept crying. I asked if she had ever planned to tell me. She admitted that she wanted to confess but was too scared because she knew cheating was a deal-breaker for me. She thought if she just stopped the affair and avoided any communication with him outside of work, she could somehow fix it on her own. She said she stopped texting him after they had sex. I pressed her further and asked if he wore a condom. She revealed that the sex wasn't planned, and because she froze up, she didn't say anything about protection. She said she would never forgive herself for it and that I had every right to hate her. Seeing the pain she caused and being without me during our no-contact period had terrified her. She pleaded with me to give our marriage another chance, but I told her she was no better than my dad. That comment hit her hard. She said it wasn't the same, but I asked, "What's the difference?" She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it away. She kept insisting we weren't like my parents and that it was different for us. She begged me to tell her we could get past this after everything we'd been through, but I couldn't say it. Then, I told her I needed a complete timeline of the affair. The request seemed to terrify her, but I insisted, and she eventually agreed. I also said we both needed to get tested, and she didn't hesitate to agree to that either. By this point, I was barely holding myself together, so I went to pack a bag and grab some essentials. She begged me to stay, even offering to sleep on the couch, just so I could be home. But I told her I couldn't stay in the same house as her right now. As I was leaving, she said she loved me more than anything and apologized again for everything. I didn't say anything back. I just couldn't. Before I walked out, she asked where I'd been staying, and I told her I was with my mom. She asked me to pass along a message to my mom, but I told her I couldn't be the go-between. I know she's worried about her relationship with my mom since they've always been so close. My mom treated her like a daughter, especially since my wife never really had a strong relationship with her own mother due to neglect. She asked if she could hug me one last time, but I said no, and walked out the door. Now, I'm left just trying to figure out my next steps. She's told more of the truth this time, but it doesn't change the reality of what's happened. I'm still unsure about her claim that she froze up, and I can't decide if I'm ready to tell other people about the affair. I feel so embarrassed, and part of me is just trying to take things one day at a time. I could really use some advice on how to move forward from here. To be honest, I'm not sure I fully believe her claim that she froze up. Even if she did, she still went through with it. And if I'm being real, there's a chance they had sex more than once. The fact that they didn't use protection. It feels so intimate, more than just a random hookup. Am I wrong to think that? Update 3. I've received the timeline from my wife about her affair with her coworker. First off, thanks to everyone for the continued support. Here's what's happened recently. I've been keeping light contact with my wife. She texted me before going in for her post-suspension meeting, and about an hour later, she let me know she'd been fired. We've also talked about getting STD tests, which we'll be doing on Thursday. Last night, she FaceTimed me. I was hesitant to pick up, but I did. She looked the same as she did when I saw her on Sunday, worn down and tired. She told me she had finished writing the timeline, and I told her I'd come by tomorrow to get it. She said writing it was one of the hardest things she's ever done, second only to us being separated. She was holding back tears. Normally, I would have comforted her, but I just couldn't. My mom offered to come with me for support. She said she wouldn't go inside the house but would wait in the car just in case I needed her afterward. I think she was worried about me driving back alone. I accepted her offer, and we drove over together. When I arrived, my wife was waiting for me inside with a 2-page document. She was clearly anxious. We sat on the couch together, and it felt like D-Day all over again. I told her I wanted her to read the timeline to me. She wasn't expecting that and looked terrified. We've always been so attuned to each other, and I could sense her fear, which only made my own dread worse. But I told her I needed her to do this for me, and after a moment of hesitation, she agreed. It was devastating. Just as crushing as it was on D-Day, just as painful as when I spoke with the other betrayed spouse, and just as heartbreaking as when she first admitted to the emotional affair. Still hurt, deeply. The timeline started from when she was first hired, leading up to D-Day. She explained how her friendship with the affair partner began, describing the work culture and how he positioned himself as different from the rest of the boys' club. While the other guys joked around, he didn't engage in the nonsense and instead kept his department intact. He went out of his way to look out for her, making sure she got recognition and credit where it was due. That's how their friendship started. Then, things took a turn. He began venting about his home life, and my wife became his listening ear. He started asking about her personal life too, and it felt like he was probing. She mentioned her mom's struggles, including her relapse, and that's when the lines between professional and personal really started to blur. As she continued reading the timeline, she explained that the affair partner grew bolder in his venting. She now wishes she had spoken up sooner, but at the time, she was blinded by seeing him as one of the good guys at work. Her coworkers would tease her, saying she was the affair partner's favorite. She didn't tell me any of this because I was dealing with my own issues with my dad, and she felt like her problems were insignificant in comparison. She didn't want to add to my stress. Instead, she vented to the affair partner, and that's how the emotional affair started. He became the one hearing about her problems, not me. That part hit hard because we'd always had an open line of communication. There was never anything we couldn't talk about, no matter what was going on. I made it clear that she was my top priority, and I would have been there for her. We were a team. From there, the affair escalated. The affair partner began flirting with her, both at work and through texts, and she started flirting back. At some point, he told her that a promotion was coming up, and he wanted to make sure she was in the running for it. He said she was one of the best employees. After she got the promotion, he hugged her. That was their first physical contact, and he jokingly told her she could thank him some other time. When the team went out for drinks, they broke away from the group and sat at their own table. He vented about his wife and kids, painting himself as the victim. They went up to his room under the pretense of continuing the party and celebrating her promotion. He turned on some music and talked about the view from his room. Then, he pulled her close, started dancing with her, and kept telling her how sexy she was. He said if he were me, he wouldn't be able to keep his hands off her. That's when he kissed her, and she said she froze up. Her mind shut down, and she couldn't feel any emotions in the moment. He started groping her, and that led to them having sex. She didn't orgasm, and he finished quickly, making a crude comment about it being one hell of a celebration. Afterward, he fell asleep, and she quietly got out of bed and went back to her room. She immediately showered, scrubbing herself over and over, but no matter how hard she tried, she still felt filthy. She didn't sleep at all that night. She just cried, thinking about me. The next morning, there was only one meeting scheduled, but she didn't attend. The affair partner called, disappointed that she missed it, and hinted at wanting a second round. She barely responded, and when he asked if something was wrong, she lied and said she was just hungover. He told her not to worry, he'd cover for her at the meeting. He even tossed out the idea of them staying an extra day. She told me she was terrified of telling me the truth because she knew cheating was a deal-breaker for me. Her plan was to stop the affair by only communicating with him at work. She came home early from the trip, absolutely wrecked with guilt, but when we reunited, she acted like nothing was wrong. She put on a mask, pretending everything was fine, even though inside, she was falling apart. On Saturday morning, my wife initiated sex, trying to wash away what she had done. But it only made her feel worse. Worse than when she had been with the affair partner without a condom. By Monday, she had pulled him aside and told him that what happened was a mistake and that they needed to leave it in the past. He didn't agree, trying to push back, but another employee approached, cutting the conversation short. After that, and after the confrontation with his wife, she called her sister in a panic. My sister-in-law found out the same day I did. There's more in the timeline, but that's the gist of it. As she read through it, she was crying, stopping every now and then to catch her breath. I wasn't holding up well either. At one point, she reached over and touched my hand, apologizing over and over, but I pulled my hand away. I couldn't do it. I needed to get out of there, so I asked for the timeline and left. Once I got to my car, I just broke down. I couldn't hold it together anymore. My mom, without saying a word, embraced me. I sat there, sobbing in her arms like I was a kid again. I was in no condition to drive, so she took the wheel and drove us back. On the ride home, my wife kept calling and texting. She even blew up my mom's phone. I told my mom I would handle it. Eventually, I called my wife back. She immediately asked if I was okay. All I could say was, "Why in the world would I be okay?" She apologized, agreeing that she was no better than my dad. She said the time I spent in no contact gave her clarity. She told me she loves me, that she's only ever loved me, and reminded me of how we started as friends before becoming best friends. Every moment we've had together, she treasures. She said she hates herself for the choices she made at work and knows nothing she's going through compares to what I, the other betrayed spouse, and those kids are facing. Nothing she's lost, she said, matters compared to the thought of losing me. She asked if I could find it in me to reconcile, that she would spend the rest of her life trying to show me what our relationship means to her and work on fixing what she's broken. I couldn't respond. My hands were literally shaking. All I managed to say was that I needed some space. Do I regret hearing the timeline? Not really. I needed to know the truth, painful as it was. Sometimes I second-guess myself, but once I make a decision, I try my best to stick to it. That's how I've always been. I've always loved my wife. We've been through so much together, and I don't want to lose that. But looking at what's happened, I feel utterly broken. I think individual counseling would be a good step. I went to counseling for a year after my dad's affair, and it helped. I also still want to go down the polygraph route to get full transparency. And honestly, I know I need to ask my wife to take a pregnancy test. She's on birth control, but I can't take any chances right now. I'd really appreciate any thoughts or advice on this whole situation. I don't think you were wrong to hear the timeline either. It's hard to listen to someone say they love you when their actions scream otherwise. Update for Hi everyone, and thanks again to all of you who've reached out with advice or support. I really appreciate it. Here's the latest update since my wife read her timeline. There hasn't been a single moment since then that the weight of it all hasn't been pressing down on me. I still haven't been able to sleep well, and I find myself reading the timeline at least once every day. Every time I go through it, I'm hit with a wave of emotions. Sadness, hurt, anger, embarrassment. Sometimes, I can't even put into words exactly how I'm feeling. I don't think my wife was lying in the timeline or trying to sugarcoat anything. Everything matches up with what the other betrayed spouse showed me. I believe she was truthful. If anything, it seems the timeline was as impactful for her as it was for me. She clearly feels the weight of her actions, but despite that, I can't shake the anger I feel. I'm furious that I didn't see what was happening. I didn't protect her when I should have. When we were 17, Something bad happened with her mom, and she came over to my house. I held her in my arms and promised her I would always protect her, no matter what. Now, with this affair, I feel like I failed. I didn't see the affair partner's motives. I just took her word for everything. On Friday night, I texted the other betrayed spouse to see if we could talk. I wanted her input and to check in on how she and the twins were doing. She called me after putting the kids to bed and told me things have been really rough on them. She's just been trying to focus on them and keep things as normal as possible, but it's been hard. She said the divorce is going to be bitter. The affair partner is acting like he's the victim, puffing himself up, and hasn't even apologized for anything. He's been living at an extended stay, and she changed the locks so he can't come and go as he pleases. I asked her if there were any red flags in the affair partner's past, things like cheating or abusing his position. She knew exactly where I was going with the question. She told me she's always been suspicious that he's had other affairs over the years, but she never had proof. He was always careful, but she thinks he got sloppy with my wife because he felt invincible. She mentioned one specific incident from 5 years ago, when he was at a previous job. A coworker reported him to HR for retaliating against her after she refused his advances. But nothing came of it. The woman was seen as a difficult employee, always late, and she was dismissed as bitter after he wrote her up. The other betrayed spouse told me she ignored the warning signs back then because she was pregnant at the time, and after that, there weren't any more allegations. He had a solid reputation. Hearing all this took me a while to process. I asked if the affair partner had given her a timeline of his affair with my wife. She said she didn't care for one. She didn't need the details. For her, the damage was done, and there was no point in revisiting it. She just wants a divorce. She asked me if I'd made a decision yet regarding my wife, and I told her I hadn't. She offered her attorney's contact information for when I was ready, or even just for a consultation. I took the info and thanked her. We talked a little about life post-D-Day before hanging up. Afterward, I felt a surge of anger toward the affair partner. I really do believe he set his sights on my wife, but that doesn't change the fact that she still had an emotional affair with him, which only grew. I just feel so deeply hurt, lost, and betrayed by all of it. I hate this entire situation. Yesterday, I couldn't shake what the other betrayed spouse had said. Then, my sister-in-law called me, and the tone of her voice was troubling. She was worried about my wife, saying she didn't think she was doing well and hadn't been eating. She asked if I'd talked to her lately, but I hadn't spoken to her since Thursday. My wife had been respecting my request for space, which I appreciated, but hearing she was in bad shape didn't sit well with me at all. It's been hard for me every single day not seeing or talking to her, despite everything. My sister-in-law suggested I try reaching out, but she didn't have to. I'd already made up my mind to see her. On the way over, I stopped at a local restaurant my wife loves and picked up her usual meal to go. Then, I headed straight to our house without giving her any warning. Admittedly, part of me wondered if I might find the affair partner there this time, but once again, his car wasn't around. When I entered the house, I found my wife lying on the couch. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching. It looked like she was going through hell. A mix of emotions hit me at once. On the one hand, she brought this on herself with her choices. On the other hand, I had this overwhelming urge to comfort her, to promise her everything would somehow be okay. She sat up, surprised to see me, and moved as if to get up, probably to hug me, but she stopped herself. I showed her the food and told her she needed to eat something. She looked caught off guard and said I didn't have to do this, but I told her I wanted to. I helped her get settled at the table, got her something to drink, and she started eating her meal. While she ate, I asked if she had heard from the affair partner or if he had been by the house. She said no. Then, I asked if I could see her phone. Without hesitation, she handed it over. I spent some time looking through it as she ate, and there were no new conversations with the affair partner. His number was still blocked. I waited until she finished eating before saying anything that might distract her. I mentioned that her sister had called, and this seemed to throw her off. She quickly assured me that she hadn't asked her sister to reach out and that she'd been trying to respect my request for space. But I told her that wasn't the issue. I told her it was okay and that I wasn't upset about the call from her sister. She looked at me and said that I shouldn't have to rush home to take care of her. But I reminded her that our vows still matter to me, and they say otherwise. That's when she started to tear up. She told me she knew she had ruined us, ruined me, and that our relationship had been the best part of her life. It meant everything to her. She said she was angry and disappointed in herself because I had only ever loved and trusted her. And she hurt and betrayed me in the worst possible way. She said she would never forgive herself. At that point, something broke inside me, and I just broke down. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She kept saying she didn't deserve me, tearing herself apart with guilt. The last thing she said was that I must regret ever being with her. For the first time since D-Day, I cut in. I told her that, yes, my life had been wrecked, but no, I didn't regret her. I reminded her of all the times she had saved me. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for her. I told her about the day we first met at the neighborhood playground when we were just 5 years old. Then, I brought up when I was 13, nervously stumbling over my words while admitting my feelings for her. I reminded her how she held my hand to reassure me even back then. Even then, I knew I wanted to be by her side. I talked about the day I proposed and how excited I was when she said yes. I told her how, for so long, I never wanted to be apart from her. She was it for me, and that never changed, not until D-Day. We both sat there, crying, unable to say another word. After a while, I tried to pull myself together and told her I needed to go. As I was leaving, she thanked me for coming over. She said she understood my need for space and that she would accept whatever consequences come her way. But she also told me she wasn't giving up on us. She's planning to start individual counseling, she said. I just nodded. I have my first individual counseling session scheduled for Monday, but even now, I feel like I'm no closer to knowing what to do. I still feel completely lost. Every emotion you can imagine is hitting me all at once. I feel like I'm trapped in a maze with no way out. I could really use some advice. Commenter. Your intentions are noble, my dude, but they're misplaced. You're feeling lost because you're conflicted. Your mind is telling you to leave her, but your heart is telling you to reconsider. The attachment you feel to the person she was is clouding your judgment. I get it, you've got a long history together, and you're not just her husband but also her protector in a way. That attachment is pulling you back. My ex and I weren't married, but we were close enough that I almost proposed to her on D-Day. We grew up together, knowing everything about each other since we were kids. I would have done anything for her, and she knew it. She knew all of this, yet she still went out of her way to cheat on me. She could have talked to me about whatever she was feeling or simply ignored the guy's advances. But instead, she chose the easiest way out. That realization that she had other options but still made the choice to betray me is what kept me from running back to her and playing the role of her guardian. I realized I had to make a choice. Either stay and rebuild trust one never broke, forging a new life from the ashes and stains of infidelity, or set myself free and start over, breaking away from the years we shared growing up together, sharing joys and pains that no one else could understand. In the end, I chose the latter. I chose to let go. I say this to you now because I know how raw and vulnerable you feel. You still want to save her, thinking it's what you're supposed to do, like somehow it will give you back what was taken from you. But it won't. She knew what she was doing, knew how much it would cost you, and still went through with it. You didn't push her toward the affair partner. You didn't make her do it. She did this on her own. If you choose reconciliation, understand this. Walking on eggshells will become your daily life. Staying in a broken marriage is like walking through a minefield. No matter how carefully you tread, there's always a chance you'll step in the wrong place and lose more pieces of yourself. She's not a child. She knew the risks and still made her choice. You can't take the blame for her actions. You're the victim here, not her. There's only one person who needs saving, and it's you. I won't make decisions for you. You have to choose what you want moving forward and what you can live with. But whatever you decide, make sure it's something that's truly yours. Not your wife's decision, not your sister-in-law's, yours. Good luck. Commenter. OP. I think the whirlwind of emotions you're experiencing is completely normal. This has been a gut-wrenching experience, and it's important to cut yourself some slack. You're going to be all over the place emotionally, and that's completely normal after such a massive betrayal. The fact that you're starting individual counseling is a huge step in the right direction. You need help sorting through the mess of emotions you're dealing with before you can even think about making major decisions. You need to heal first, or at least begin to, before you feel strong enough to face whatever comes next. But I need you to stop trying to take responsibility for her actions. You promised to protect her, sure, but you can't protect someone from something they've hidden from you. Not only did you not know, but she actively deceived you. She didn't just hurt you. She hurt herself and walked willingly into that affair. It's clear from the outside that if you're considering working things out, you need to be extremely cautious. I can't stress enough. Don't rush this, especially not reconciliation. If she's truly committed to fixing what she's broken, she will give you all the time you need. She will let you process everything at your own pace. Be well, OP. Another commenter. The way you're feeling is completely valid, OP. It's hard to wrap your head around something like this, let alone try to make decisions that will change the course of your life. But I'm not sure I agree with the idea that the affair partner preyed on her. Your wife made conscious choices. She wasn't some helpless victim. She chose to respond to him, to flirt, to take things further. She didn't have to, but she chose to. Take your time. There's no need to rush into any decision right now. Feel your emotions, process everything, and the answers will come when you're ready. Trying to push through this too quickly will only backfire.